Are the New Orleans Saints about ready to pull off some type of draft surprise? Adam Schefter may have been alluding to it in an interview with Rich Eisen, while at the exact same time, 1,000 miles away, Mickey Loomis may have been confirming it in his pre-draft press conference. Going to kind of break down what they said in both instances and what it really could mean for the New Orleans Saints starting in day one of the NFL draft, which will be about 24 hours from now. I'm Tim. Let's talk Saints. Now, before we get into the Adam Schefter, Rich Eisen interview, it's about 6 minutes long, but there's a couple of key points in there that I think echoed the press conference Mickey was given almost at the same time. Now, originally I was going to break down Mickey's press conference, but couldn't for a couple of reasons. One, the audio of what I was watching on YouTube was terrible, especially when it came to the reporters' questions. It's kind of hard to follow, even with the closed captions on, but you kind of get Mickey's point of view, but sometimes some of his answers is a little out of context. You kind of guessing. And the fact that, I think everybody's heard the news by now that he did acknowledge Carr has an injury, and that's about the extent of it, and he didn't want to talk about it. So interspersed in there constantly is obviously questions about Carr, the quarterbacks, all that stuff that he's like, no, I don't even want to answer that. I told you I'm not going to answer it. It's very hard to do. So watch it a couple times, especially the first 10 minutes, because I think draft relevance, that's where a lot of the good stuff was, because there actually was some good stuff in here. And I think just to kind of summarize it the best that I can, and if you want to go back and watch it, and hopefully somebody have cleared up the audio and you might be able to hear better, but the draft approach, he talked about draft mistakes they made, drafting upside in kind of their evaluation process, and even a little bit about the top 10. Talked about trading up versus trading back, and then kind of got into a few specific things. But the first roughly 10 minutes or so, kind of on that approach, the mistakes, the upside, that sort of thing, interspersed with other, hey, who's the starting quarterback? I take it type questions. I found it interesting, and I found it informative, because I think this may be the first time Mickey admitted to some stuff I think deep down we all knew. That they lean heavily on their evaluation process, which every team should, but did kind of give glimpses here and there, mixing in all these different questions and answers he was given, a little bit about that process that I don't think I've ever seen it kind of laid out like that. But in essence, what he's saying is they have a grading process, and he was, I think, asked some questions, because some of the answers to the questions I couldn't hear were kind of implying, yes, we consider like positions in need or positions of importance, was one of his answers, where, yes, that is factored into our evaluation process, which I'm taking that's almost kind of part of the grading system. He's talking about that a lot of times that in his experience when they've been there, that when they've drafted, they've had several players with grades that are really, really close, several, 2 or 3, whatever the number may be at whatever position they're in the draft. And a lot of times going back and reflecting need or fit to scheme, or of the 3, who fits those best out of these 3 players. And that ends up being the selection. He also mentioned the fact that he brought up 2 examples of this grading process when somebody's on the board that is clearly they have at the top of their grading process. Deuce McAllister and Will Smith were the 2 that he mentioned specifically. They're going to take him. No questions asked whether there's a need there or not, I guess. They're going to take him. And that's what they did in those 2 cases. Trading up and trading back kind of builds on, when he talked about that, this whole evaluation process, and almost a little bit, he admits, swinging for the fences mode. And the fact that, well, trading back, I get more swings, right? That's what you're saying. I trade 1 pick back to pick up extra picks to swing. And he claims to not be opposed to trading back and he admits his record probably or definitely shows that he rarely does it. He's more of a trade up, but his thinking that he said was the reason why I want to do that is because if I've got that player evaluated so high with that high grade, why wouldn't I want to go up and make sure I get him? Now, I'm not saying I agree or necessarily disagree with these little hodgepodge things that he's thrown out there as part of the draft philosophy. I think we kind of knew most of that just looking back on the history of our drafts, especially lately, and kind of keeps going back to that evaluation process. I think that evaluation process, now, there were really no questions that I know of. And if it was one of them that I couldn't hear the question being asked, he more than likely dodged the answer. Um, about changes in the evaluation process, and I know what they're getting at, the prototype or whatever you want to call it of the modern NFL player and what you're trying to do. That's a subject that's been breached before, that's been talked about with no clear answers. I don't think you really got one in that press conference on that either. But the evaluation process, once upon a time for the Saints, was pretty good. Has not been so lately. Has gotten us in a lot of trouble. So I'm taken away from this. If this is because he's mentioned several times, we believe in this. We basically admittingly going, our philosophy, our approach hadn't really changed. He did admit that in the case of trading up or going for that home run swing like they've done at times, it only works when your evaluation is correct. When your evaluation is wrong, of course, those are the ones we miss. At least he was, I think, for the first time ever that I know of, kind of honest about, yeah, we got some wrong. Didn't mention them by name, but I think we know who they are, especially in the last couple of drafts. So I kind of went, okay, there's a little maybe acceptance, maybe acknowledgement. I don't know exactly at this point when I'm watching this going, I don't know how this is translating directly to our draft. And there were questions, obviously, some I could hear them being asked. So I know why and how he was answering, and some I couldn't, but I was guessing along the same lines as, and a couple of times he said, good question, but yeah, I don't know if I really have an answer. I want to answer that. So kind of like probably digging in a little closer to the actual draft board, the draft philosophy going into this draft, going, yeah, look, no, I don't want to divulge anything. Or he may have been truly stumped by the question. Who the hell knows? But I'd like to think at this point it was just, no. You're getting a little too much into our draft board, and we're not going to do that. So bearing all this in mind, when I did watch the clip, some of the things Schefter and Eisen talked about in a very brief, like I said, only about 6 minutes long, I kind of kicked in some of the stuff that Mickey was talking about. Now, some kind of factual or a little closely draft related stuff. He did acknowledge that the change in the defensive philosophy is coming. It's going to change some of the personnel, obviously, and that is something that's going to kind of, going to kind of. I don't think he acknowledged necessarily in this draft, but something that is going to have to be done where there's going to be a roster personnel issue. I think we all kind of knew that, but he put his stamp on it. Specifically to that, the little bit he did kind of say in this draft in regards to, or into response to a question on kind of the position depths in the draft. So on the defensive side, which I'm just wondering, is it because of some defensive stuff had been asked prior to that, especially talking about Brandon Staley, or was it on his mind for some other reason? Defensive line is deeper than he's normally used to seeing, and corners less so, basically. Or I think again that's something we all kind of knew, but he's acknowledging at least that much. He did throw this out here, and I was kind of happy to hear this in the sense that I was wondering if this was on the table, so to speak. Lines, both offensive and defensive. And he said he and Kellen Moore pretty much they kind of both have that same philosophy. They need to build from the lines going back. And I think that's important right now because regardless if we can get out of our offensive and defensive lines this year, you can look up and down both of them and go, at some point, you're going to be making replacements, if not this year, in the very near future. Along those lines, some of the factual stuff talked about was that you had two players whose fifth-year option is up this year. They picked up Chris Olave's fifth-year option. They declined Trevor Penning's. He had the line, they still love Penning and expect him to be part of the team in the future, whatever that means. And however they may try to bring him back, it ain't going to be with that fifth-year option wired in. So some type of bring him back later on another deal, basically. And then just to wrap this up, one line he said, I played it back several times to make sure I heard it right. We're 5-12. We have to win now, regardless of the reasons, and that falls on me. Just a little excited to hear acknowledgement of that and a little accountability. Because, I mean, it's a true statement. The guy totally in charge, and that's him. That's where the buck's going to stop ultimately. But I also, in hearing that statement, want to curiously is he may be finally getting some pressure from up above about enough's enough, man. No more excuses. We're not, you got to do something. You got to make it happen this year. Who knows? So the Adam Schefter interview on the Rich Eisen Show, just a couple little things. And like I said, I saw this well after I kind of started putting some notes together after watching the Loomis press conference. And right off the bat, one of the first things this clip kind of talks about is in a way some of the stuff that Mickey covered, and kind of thinking it could have an effect on what we're going to do at 9, quite honestly.
I said, I don't think Mason Graham is going number 5 like everybody's pegged him to go for weeks now. Like everybody had Mason Graham going to the Jaguars, right? Mm-hmm. So that would qualify as a surprise that no longer would be a surprise. So now you're asking for the next surprise.
Okay.
The next surprise. I think we need a lot of them in the top 10 because there's no real consensus on these guys, and there seems to be mixed opinions on all of them, and the player from 10 to 32 seems to be similar. I think.
And right off the bat, no consensus in the top 10. From 10 to 32, this feeling that he's portraying, that the league is saying they're all really close. Thinking back about what Mickey was saying about having a group of guys that their grades are all really close. What do you kind of do? You're kind of, the tiebreakers. Where's the better scheme fit? Who's the better, what's the biggest need out of this group? Going from that standpoint that Mickey's talking about in the case of the Saints, we trust our evaluation process, right or wrong, and we're looking for the best football players that we have graded the highest. Specifically about Graham, and I think this falls into the acknowledgement a lot of the league has about how deep defensive line is. Defensive interior guys are deep. And that break-off point, if anybody's interested in saying, well, Graham might be so clearly better, a separation point higher than all the rest of them, that's worthy of keeping him in the top 10. And talking about, Jacksonville that had been pegged for the longest time, they're definitely taking Graham. Seems like that's kind of philosophy on that has changed. That shakeup of where everybody has evaluated those guys in the top 10, right? Who's the top, who's the best, who's the highest ranked or highest graded, and where do the Saints fall in all that, especially when you tie in that Mickey talked about having to get some personnel changes along the defensive side because of the scheme change and wanting to build lines or building the team from the lines on back. So all of a sudden, he's right off the bat. He's kind of throwing some stuff out there going, Mickey was more or less in his own way, Saint specific, talking about a lot of the stuff that Adam Schefter's covering right here. And, I'm like, damn, that was interesting.
I think the Bears would love to get their hands on an offensive weapon. I don't know if one of them will be there. It might be contingent upon whether the Jets take Tyler Warren or Membu, the tackle from Missouri.
So it basically is going to be a night where everybody's holding their powder on making a trade.
I think that kind of says an awful lot right there. You think, in a weird sort of way, the point they're making there, it could be no trades. Still, I'm filming this about 24 hours from the start of the draft. Still nothing pulled on that trigger. That's insane that everybody is still in their original first round slot at this point. And nothing's really happening. I think he may be on to something there. Some type of domino effect of an avalanche of trades may come out once, I think the top 3 picks, it seems like Ward, Hunter, and Carter. And I don't even know if anybody can confidently say a done deal, but I think that's the impression everybody's getting right now. And then what happens after that may start that avalanche of as he said, just setting off the fireworks of trades. Entirely possible. So I had to jump ahead a little bit, fast forward a bit, because they got into an offshoot about former colleague Peter Schrager. So we're going to pick up the point where they get to, after they're done with all that, they get to the point what Peter Schrager said and Schefter having some thoughts about that. And this is one of them that I really started raising eyebrow type situation going, some interesting thoughts about ready to come from Adam Schefter.
He said that the Browns at 2 and the Giants at 3 are fielding calls from teams trading up. What I would say is that the Browns have fielded more calls from teams in front of them in the first round saying, do you want to come get your quarterback?
Interesting take there. Especially when really almost at the exact same time, Mickey's talking about the fact, well, if I've got somebody highly ranked, why wouldn't I trade up to go get him? Now you throw in there the possibility that it sounds like the Browns want a quarterback in this draft, but they have the very first pick in the second round, and they're a lot what the Chargers did with Drew Brees all those years ago, trying to go, we can get our guy with the first pick in the second round. Could be why there's this interest with him talking about that. Schrager had said, well, a lot of people are trying to get to the second and third picks overall. And he's kind of saying, well, odds are they may be fielding more calls from teams in the 20s, so to speak, going, hey, you want to come up here to make sure you get your quarterback? And there's been a rumor for a little bit now about the Saints trying to do the exact same thing all along, kind of thinking, they wanted, if Cleveland or the Giants or anybody passes on that quarterback in the top 10, trying to make sure that any team after that group, like the Saints, would have to get in the first round to go get them. Or in Cleveland's case, just stay put. Well, do you want to stop the Saints from jumping in front of you? How would you like to come up?
Meaning in front of them with their second round pick.
Correct.
Because obviously you'd be referring to Tennessee if you're other way around. So because they have the 33rd overall pick.
They have the opening pick on Friday night.
And they're basically like, hey, we know you're not taking your quarterback
second overall. So all these teams that want to move back, a group of them have called the Browns to say, hey.
That's the calls they're fielding, not on 2, but more on
No, I think they're fielding calls on 2 to a certain extent. But of the 2 scenarios, what's more likely? Them trading back from 2?
Yes.
Or trading up from 33? Probably neither, But if I was to say 1, they're more likely to trade up from 33 than they are to trade out of 2.
So who's the quarterback most likely to be traded up for at the end of the first round on Thursday night? What do you think there? That's another mystery to be talked about in this.
I've had this conversation with various quarterback-needy teams in this.
Now, this is where it gets kind of interesting. In a way, thinking back to Mickey just kind of talking about how they, and again, not specifically, but just very general over the comments that he was making over like that first 10-minute portion of his press conference. The Saints seemingly taking into account positions of need and positions of importance, and I think quarterback kind of falls in both those slots.
This draft.
Yes, sir.
And they're not going to tell you their boards. You're not going to know that they value Tyler Shuck over Jackson Dart or Shador over Jalen.
I'm maybe going to stop and pause it here. We know this.
Over Jackson Dart. Like, you don't know. Mm-hmm. And that's the great part about the draft, because it's the moment of truth, and we get to see these teams put their cards on the table. Oh, so they traded up for this guy.
Right.
Now, I could tell you there seems to be a lot of sentiment out there, right or wrong, that the Saints love Jackson Dart.
So eventually we get back around to the conversation on who the Saints love. And this Saints, I think this goes all the way back to his pro day when the Saints sent a heavy presence there to Ole Miss. That this has kind of been in the cards. Now, I shouldn't say in the cards because this is by no stretch a done deal, but in the wind, rumor-wise, that Saints really want Jackson, be able to get their hands on Jackson Dart, precipitated by some people saying, well, they're going to have to draft him at 9 to get him. And now we're coming back around into this possibility of the Saints saying, well, no, we're going to try to trade up into the bottom of the first and essentially have 2 first-round picks where, going with Mickey's comments, best, highest graded player available at 9. And a good chance, in the case of even if Graham is slipping, somebody like Graham falling in there. And I think a lot of Saints fans would be happy with that, especially if you can get, say, Jackson Dart, or if it's Shador Sanders if he falls. And that's really, the Saints have been throwing a smokescreen out, trying to make sure everybody stays away from Sanders in some way, shape, or form so they could pull a maneuver like this. I don't really know, but just thinking about what Mickey was kind of laying out generically about a lot of the stuff he's talking about that they did in the past that they still want to do, still, I don't want to know if it makes sense. Makes sense in the way the Saints do things, it kind of playing out in a very similar manner tomorrow night in the first round.
There's a belief amongst teams that the Saints love him. The Giants have an awful lot of ties with all their Ole Miss ties to Jackson Dart. Tyler Shuck, in the eyes of some, they think that he could potentially be the best quarterback in this draft class. Jalen Milroe's got this great upside that you need to harness. But I don't know how the Browns and the Giants and the Saints have them ranked.
And there it is in a nutshell. Who's got who, what, where? What are they willing to do to make sure they get their guy? If they're not willing to use their top 10 pick on a quarterback and looking for using their second round pick, which is going to be very difficult, or trying to move back up into the first round with a host of teams, apparently, according to Schefter, at the bottom of the first going, screw this. We would rather pick up the extra picks. Take more swings, as Mickey was saying, by trading back instead of taking your big swing by trading up, which it's Mickey's MO. That's what Mickey likes to do, right? I think just weirdly, this was getting all tied in together. And I don't know if this conversation, in the back of Schefter's mind, he's talking about what he knows and kind of what he thinks and what he suspects and all that. And he is not aware that Mickey's having a press conference or what he's saying at this point in this interview, but just generally knowing that for the longest time, Mickey Loomis has been in charge of the Saints. And for the most part, they kind of, and Mickey admitted to this, their process in this, not really has changed much over the years. They're still trying to do the same thing, whether right or wrong, and we'll see if it works. The point being, is Schefter, I'm wondering if is kind of picking up on this as he's given this analysis. And if he's picked up on it and kind of wired into it somewhat, could we safely say most of the rest of the league is?
Browns don't know.
So do the Saints love Dart 9th overall, love?
I don't think so.
Okay.
I think that's the general consensus. And I think the general consensus overall with quarterbacks in some way, shape, or form is, say, Dart and Shedeur Sanders, I think, are not early first, later first type situation. Just my impression. Now, fans and media types and all have wildly taken different stances on that, but at least the impressions that kind of seem to be coming out this close to the draft, which is a good chance they're all bullshit and lies. I get it. But at the same time, it could be kind of that consensus where, you're only going to have one quarterback going in the top 15. And then after that, it's going to start getting real interesting. And it may be getting interesting with more names than just Sanders and Dart, and more teams than just the Saints and Giants and Browns. I don't know if I believe that, but I guess it is possible.
Okay.
I don't think they love him like that. But the Saints typically have been a very aggressive team in going up to get who they want.
Mm-hmm.
So if and when they don't pick a quarterback at 9, and by the way,
yes,
that may be the surprise. On Thursday night, we're sitting there, and with the 9th overall pick, the New Orleans Saints select Ole Miss quarterback Jackson Dart.
That'll be something.
But you could see it.
But it's more likely that we see multiple tight ends and running backs chosen before the second quarterback.
And that's an interesting comment that Schefter immediately agreed with. More likely to see multiple tight ends and running backs taken before the second quarterback. Now, how many? You may only be talking about 2 tight ends and 2 running backs. Say Warren and Loveland and Genty and Hampton before that second quarterback comes off the board. I don't know if you're going to get much deeper than that. But then all of a sudden you see this and I forget who posted on Twitter this morning, but this rumor popping out that Kansas City's showing a lot of interest in Henderson, the running back from Ohio State, because they're feeling a glaring need at running back right now. Would they pull the trigger late in the first to fill a glaring need at running back? They did it in the 2020 draft. That's when they draft Clyde Edwards-Helaire with basically I don't remember if it was the last pick or the second, but basically at the tail end of the first round. Who knows? It's intriguing, but some kind of way, in shape or form, this always seems to be, for whatever reason, going back to the quarterbacks where they're going, because if you want to trade up in front of Cleveland, if you're the Saints, in that little report, if there's any truth to it, then it seems like there's one more team off the board because they want to sit and take Henderson with that spot? Or is that potentially the team you can get up front with because they're like, we feel like we could get Henderson at 40, which I feel like they could likely get Henderson at 40. But now you got Eisen and Schefter talking about, well, there may be multiple tight ends and running backs taken before the second quarterback comes around.
There's some mixed opinions on the corners.
Why? Because our guy Will Johnson got hurt last year? Is that what it is?
Okay, they go off in a little Will Johnson tear here. But I can't disagree with what they're about ready to say. But there may be a few. I don't remember how long it goes on about their 2 Michigan guys, so just bear with a little bit while we go through that.
Because that guy was top 5 when by the way, when we were winning it all, you and I, okay, because we were factors.
Yeah, no, he was a top 5 pick a year ago.
No doubt. For Team 144.
Came back and has been kind of raked over the coal. I love the kid. Great kid.
Sure.
Great player. I don't think he's going to go in top 5 in this draft. I don't think he'll be a top 10 pick in this draft.
Right.
Well, here's a question. I'm glad they win here because go back to what Mickey said. I think corner for the Saints. I don't know if it's a true position of need right now, but it could be a position of concern. I think we could safely put that there depending on kind of what happens, and a lot of that has to do with Alontae Taylor. And also Kool-Aid McKinstry to continue to develop, I think, like we all expect he will. But was a top 5 player, had his injury issues and whatever else that's kind of taken the shine off of him, allowed Jahdae Barron to kind of move up into that, and even some of the other corners possibly, but I still think Johnson's one of the top 2, right? Well, depending on what Brandon Staley wants to do on the defensive backside and how the Saints have it graded, could Will Johnson be the guy with the exceptionally high grade sitting there at 9, where he's the, for lack of a better reference, when they did it with Deuce McAllister, well, hell, they're going to do it with Will Johnson right here. And it wouldn't hurt my feelings because I do agree with them. I think the kid is really, young man, really, really good. I mean, almost to the point, I think, as long as he's over the health issues and all that stuff, right? He's going to be every bit as good as Kool-Aid McKinstry or better showing up. And what's not to love about having 2 corners of that high caliber on your team?
You guys talk about the Saints. Mickey Loomis is speaking right now.
Yep.
Acknowledge that Derek Carr has a shoulder injury, and they hope to have clarity on the situation soon. There was a bunch of follow-up questions. He said, I'm done answering questions about Derek.
Okay. And in all honesty, I saved that part. So that's how I knew, because prior to this, when I started watching this clip on X, no clue that evidently these 2 things were happening simultaneously. So they just said that. And I thought this was taped earlier or from maybe yesterday. Who knows? Didn't really understand that was basically a live clip, more or less, while Mickey was live giving his press conference. And so I watched one, went back and watched another on 2 things happening at the same time, and kept kind of, with their conversations they were having, stuff Mickey had said popping back up in my head. Now, I don't know what that means. I don't know if that means we figured out or I figured out. Now, I can almost guarantee you probably not exactly what the Saints' plans are for this draft, not by any stretch of the imagination. But to me, the biggest takeaway is a little, from Mickey's side of it, a little more openness than, I guess, for lack of better of anything, from him in recent memory at any rate. And again, I think a lot of what he talked about, we kind of deep down knew it wasn't like he was dropping a hot flash news on us. I think that's one of the reasons why that press conference is just like, it was what it was. But then sitting here and hearing Schefter talk about a lot of the stuff almost at the same time, going, again, it's kind of out there. He's picked up on it just through the years of this repeating itself and how much of the rest of the league is on it. And when they're playing this gamesmanship for potentially whatever the second quarterback off the board is going to be, which team's going to take him, the Saints are in that mix. In the early second, do we get back in the – I'll keep kind of all around the same conversation. You think it's been a long time, I think, since there's any – I don't want to say intrigue, but maybe that's the right word about what the Saints are going to do. Like they said, taking Dart at 9 would actually be a surprise, despite the fact a lot of people have claimed that might be what they do. I think the end of the first round could be very exciting for the Saints. I think definitely the second round. I think that for Saints fans, it's probably, I wouldn't swear to it, but I'd put it in the high percentile. This is going to be some must-see TV over at least through the third round. But what they're going to do and how it's going to shake out. Now, that's it. That's my pre-draft press conference, presser, whatever you want to call it. First time here, yep, please go ahead, bang that subscribe button for me. Give me the thumbs up. Let's I've not checked comments yet today. It's late. I'm going to go back. I think there's a load of them in there. I think there's going to be a load more after this. I think we're going to be building up ultimately for that draft. So remember, tomorrow night live streaming we're going to start about 6:45 Central. We're going to, even though I got to put some coffee on, we're going to try to go as far as we're going to go because there could be some considerable interest and possibility that the Saints pick at 9 and they may not be done for the night. So, like I said, we're about 24 hours away from that point. And we'll see y'all all in 24 hours, hopefully. So until then, I'm Tim. Peace out and who dat.